Today we're discussing some potential NHL trades we might see after the roster freeze ends after the holidays, including teams like the Penguins, Flames, and Hurricanes. Plus, we have some pretty significant injuries to a few NHL goalies. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of news topics to discuss today. First of all, I want to kick things off with some injury updates on a few NHL goaltenders that we've seen injured here over the past few days. I want to kick things off with Arizona Coyotes goalie Darcy Kuemper, who was injured in last night's loss to the Minnesota Wild. I mean, Darcy Kuemper has been one of the best goalies around the NHL, is having a Vezina caliber type of season for them. Him along with Antti Raanta have been the backbone of that team and are a big part of the reason why they have done so well and been able to hold down a first place spot in their division. Obviously, because of their play, they're one of the better defensive teams in the league. And of course, he went out with an injury last night and is going to be out for at least a week or so, probably listed here as week to week for the time being. So they've called up Adin Hill to play along with Antti Raanta over the next little while. Obviously, he'll have a few extra days off here, anyways, over the Christmas break. So we'll see how things go for Kuemper, but certainly that could be a big blow for the Coyotes if he ends up being out for any kind of extended period of time. Now, another goalie that we're going to kind of keep our eye on here, too, is Ottawa Senators goalie Anders Nilsson, who apparently has been diagnosed with a concussion. Now, of course, he's been out for the last few games. They've had youngster Marcus Högberg up from Belleville playing, and he's certainly done relatively well. Craig Anderson's been out as well, but Anderson apparently is ready to return, so they won't need to make any additional moves or emergency call-ups. They'll likely run with Anderson and likely Högberg or possibly even Philip Gustafsson for the short term here while Nilsson recovers. But, of course, with a concussion, it's really difficult to say, what kind of time frame we're looking at. Everybody recovers at different rates. They're all, very unique on their own. So I guess we will see. But a couple of key injuries there to keep our eyes on. Now, as I mentioned, we have a roster freeze in place right now over the next few days until the holidays are over with in the NHL. So we're not going to be seeing any trades, but it doesn't mean there isn't more talk and rumblings through the rumor mill. So I have a few things I want to bring up and discuss with you here today. And I want to kick things off with the Calgary Flames. Now, based on information that we've seen here over the last few days, it looks as though the Flames were more than likely like kind of what we call the runner-up in the Taylor Hall sweepstakes. Obviously, he ended up being traded to the Arizona Coyotes, but the Flames were very much involved in the mix there right up to the end, and we're making a very different type of pitch to the Devils to try to require the playmaking winger. Now, Calgary, of course, is somewhat of a home for Taylor Hall. He was born in Calgary and spent the first big chunk of his life living in that area. I believe when he was about 13, they moved to Ontario. Obviously, he played in the OHL during his junior time, etc. But he was originally born in Calgary and, to some extent, still considers that to be somewhat home. So for Taylor Hall to go back to Calgary, it is somewhat of a homecoming, and there are a team that's been mentioned within the rumor mill of either wanting to trade for him or talk to him as a free agent next offseason should he reach that point and be able to do so. Now, it's believed that the Flames were making more of a hockey-type trade. Like I said, not really a future-based trade like we saw go down between the Coyotes and the Devils with all prospects and picks going the other way. It's believed that they were looking to move a roster player or two. Now, most of the speculation out there indicates that it likely would include a defenseman, probably Travis Hamonic, as well as a forward, which some believe to be Sam Bennett. There could have been some other pieces in there as well, maybe a pick or more or two, which certainly could have gone a long way to helping the Devils, a little bit more right now, but that's not really what they were interested in. Of course, for the Flames to make things work, they also really wanted to talk to Taylor Hall about a contract extension. That was a big part of the puzzle for them, that they wanted to have that ability to discuss with him, and of course, that's not something that they were able to do. They were not given consent to discuss contract with his agent or himself, as other teams weren't either. And that was certainly ended up being a major deterrent. But it looks as though they were very heavily involved. So I do suspect that the Flames will likely be active trying to make another type of addition. Obviously, Taylor Hall is the big fish out there in the trade market, but there's certainly lots of other adequate forwards that are in the mix that have had their name out there in the rumor mill as well. So wouldn't be surprising to see the Flames try to make a different acquisition. Or once we reach July 1st next offseason, would not be surprising to see them be in the mix to land Taylor Hall as a free agent if he makes it there. And many suspect that he likely is going to test free agency and will have the ability to speak with any NHL club. Now, I also want to jump over here and take a look at some information that's coming from TSN insider Pierre LeBrun, who was through Twitter's been talking a bit about some defensemen, mostly with the Carolina Hurricanes, but to an extent the Buffalo Sabres as well. The Sabres are a team we've mentioned before, no real big surprise there. Still lots of talk that they likely would want to move a defenseman like Colin Miller, Marco Scandella, or Zach Bogosian in order to obtain some help at the forward position. Of course, they have more than enough defensemen now. They have contracts that they would like to move, and there really isn't any further updates on that. But he was mostly talking today about the Hurricanes as well. They also have more than enough ample defensemen on their blue line who can play the role of the top 6 guys. So they very well could use that to add some scoring up front, which they would like to do before the playoffs time. And one name that he actually dangled that he wondered if might be possibly available for the right deal would be newly signed Jake Gardiner. Gardner's a new member of the Hurricanes who signed as a free agent this offseason. But of course, right now he's not playing nearly as much as he did before when he was with the Leafs. He has the 5th highest ice time on the Canes blue line, and he kind of wonders if maybe things just are not as great a fit there as they might have thought. Now, of course, he signed a longer-term contract, just over $4 million, so it's not really all that expensive per se for what he's done in the past. Teams might be willing to take that on. He does have a modified no trade as well. I believe he has a 7-team list that he can put a no trade on. So there, obviously that still leaves a lot of teams to talk to. Obviously, their top 4 guys are pretty much in place. Obviously, some of the defensemen that are playing ahead of him, like Hamilton and Pesce, as well as Jacob Slavin, are certainly not going anywhere. But it's not only really Gardiner that he talked about. He also mentioned potential unrestricted free agents, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, as well as Joel Edmondson, who was also recently acquired from the Blues in that Justin Falk deal. So clearly the Canes have more than enough defensemen. A couple are pending unrestricted free agents. Gardiner, even though he's not playing as much and he's not putting up the points like he used to. He's not getting the ice time and the opportunities like he did with Toronto that he's certainly capable of, or at least he's proven that he was in the past. I mean, I know Jake Gardiner was one of those players who really took a long time to get his contract in place throughout the offseason. There was a lot of people questioning what teams thought of him because clearly there doesn't seem to be as many offers out there as we might have thought. But as we discussed during the offseason, a lot of the rumors, he did confirm via interview, though, that there was a lot of interest from the Montreal Canadiens who were trying to make a pitch to sign him as a free agent during the offseason, and also why he ended up choosing Carolina and how life is very different down there. But Jake Gardiner is certainly a name to keep your eye on. And if not Gardiner, like I said, one of those other guys on the Canes, they have more than enough guys, just like the Sabres do, looking for scoring help. And wouldn't be surprising once the roster freeze ends sometime here soon, probably in January, if we can finally get a deal done. But the only issue is with all these guys, that there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot much of a market right now for teams that are really looking heavily for D or willing to pay the price. So it's obviously slowing things down. So we very well might see a bit of a logjam on the defense market as we get closer to the trade deadline. There's also a recent article in The Athletic from Josh Yeo in a mailbag type of segment where he was answering questions from fans, and he got talking about the possibility of the Penguins adding a top 6 forward sometime between now and the NHL trade deadline. Now, the Penguins have done reasonably well considering all the adversity they faced this year, all the injuries they've had. They've really had a lot of young guys step up and do a pretty decent job. They have guys like Brian Russ and Jake Gensel are having phenomenal seasons. Malkin's picked up the pace since Crosby's been out. Of course, Crosby will be back at some point as well, which will also be a big boost to them later into the season. But there's also been some talk about them maybe adding somebody like a Jason Zucker or possibly a Tyler Toffoli. To some extent, there was some belief they might have had some talks on the Taylor Hall deal, but I don't think things really ever got serious on that front. But there was some talks with the Wild before on Zucker when they were trying to trade Phil Kessel. So clearly that's a player that they were very interested in. Of course, Toffoli from the Kings would be another player that would certainly make sense for them. He feels the Penguins will add some type of scoring winger who can play a top 6 type of role. Obviously, a guy like Alex Galchenyuk, who's a pending UFA and not really working out, would be something that they'd like to move. He also mentioned Nick Bukestad, as we've talked about before, would also make sense as a potential trade chip as well. So I do think it makes a lot of sense with everything they've been through that the Penguins would be in the mix for a top 6 type of winger heading into the playoff stretch, and wouldn't be surprising to see them target one of the guys mentioned, or there's some other guys around the NHL as well. But could we see them revisit a Jason Zucker trade with the Minnesota Wild that they thought they had in place before Phil Kessel nixed a trade? I think Zucker would be a great addition in Pittsburgh, but obviously the Minnesota Wild's decisions on what they're going to do will likely largely depend on their play. They obviously had a really bad start to the season, but have since played much better, picked things up, and now they're kind of squeezing in here on a potential closing in on a wild card spot. So obviously if they have playoff hopes, they're not going to want to sell off any assets that would be helpful in the playoffs. So it's really largely, I think, going to depend on how things go over probably the next 4 to 6 weeks, and if they can hang around and be in contention for the playoffs or not. If it's looking like they're going to miss, then perhaps we'll see some assets be moved out, and Zucker certainly could be a guy who is on that list of players that could leave Minnesota. Quick update here as well on Ilya Kovalchuk. Bob McKenzie weighed in on Twitter indicating some of the teams that have been mentioned as having interest in Kovalchuk that he doesn't believe they actually do. That includes the Penguins, who we just talked about, as well as the Boston Bruins. Based on information Bob McKenzie has, he doesn't feel either of those teams are likely going to show enough interest to sign Kovalchuk to a contract. I know former Sportsnet insider John Shannon also has information on Twitter indicating that he feels Kovalchuk will not be signed to a deal anytime soon. It's likely going to be a while. Teams are going to want to get through the holiday roster freeze, kind of evaluate a little bit further here on what they might be willing to take on. Obviously, it's been known that Kovalchuk's willing to accept a league minimum contract for the option and ability to play with a contending team at a possible Stanley Cup, but he doesn't think that teams are going to really be lining up too quickly here, that it might take a little while before a team actually gets something done. And like I said, the Bruins have been the main team that's been mentioned in the rumor mill, but according to Bob McKenzie, they don't actually have a series of interest as many have let on. So I guess we will see where Kovalchuk lands and if what team is willing to take a chance on the former Russian sniper to a short-term deal. I just want to know your thoughts and opinions on everything discussed here today, so make sure you leave me some comments down below and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.